This podcast is sponsored by Metrobank. Relationships are important and everyone deserves a great experience throughout their financial journey. Metrobank's service is built upon human connection and real long-standing relationships, whether it's face-to-face, over the phone, online, or on the app. Speak to the Metrobank team about your personal or business banking needs. This is relationship banking. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast, a different episode for you today. Today, we are essentially asking why haven't England produced a world-class batter since the era that gave us Nat Sciver-Brunt, Heather Knight, Tammy Beaumont, et al. The ECB's substantial investment in the game in recent years hasn't yet seen the development of a batter in that class. And in some ways, England have, if anything, fallen behind their competitors. Since 2018, England have qualified for just one global final from 6 events. And when you look at the Women's Premier League, Nat Sciver-Brunt is the competition's leading run scorer, but you have to go down 18 spots past 6 Australians before you get to the second placed English batter, Alice Capsey. Katya, this is quite an ambitious episode. How have you gone about trying to find the answers here?
I think one thing I did learn was there's not really a specific answer. It's more a conglomeration of different factors that have gone in the specific way the game was developed in England over the last 10, 15 years that has gone into this. And I wanted to go back to that kind of time where Nat Sciver-Brunt, even Anya Shrubsole, Catherine Sciver-Brunt were coming through and what made them stand out, and also the environment which produced them in the environment that allowed them to develop those specific set of skills that allowed them to be or become the best in the world, both looking at a club point of view, a county point of view, an England academy point of view, an England point of view, everything from coaches to player environment. So yeah, it was quite an ambitious task.
And you've got some very interesting voices on it as well. So we're going to hear from Lauren towards the end of the show, who's done some digging for us, speaking to some people in Australia, actually directly comparing the setups between in England and in Australia. But first of all, we're going to hear from Alexia Walker and Paul Shaw. First up is Alexia Walker. Walker played 3 ODIs for England in 2001 before going on to be one of the key figures at the Loughborough High Performance Centre before becoming cricket performance manager at Loughborough Uni in 2006. She was also director of cricket at Brighton College in the early 2010s and is now the head coach of Sussex. She spoke about what the pathway looked like for women's players climbing the ranks in the 90s, how young international players were nurtured in the mid-2000s, and the expansion of the pathway system in recent years.
Part of this investigative episode we're doing is looking at why the domestic system, among other factors at the minute, hasn't produced batters in particular who have managed to break into and stay in the England side. If you look at the stats since Nat Sciver-Brunt and Heather Knight and that generation alongside Tammy Beaumont and Amy Jones, it's only really been Sophia Dunkley who's nailed down a spot for the most part in the last 10 years. You're a contemporary of Claire Connor at Sussex in the mid to late 90s, and at that time it was a completely different landscape for women's cricket, both globally and nationally. The Sussex pathway was probably the best in the country around that time for women. Why was that?
Well, I'm sure everyone involved at Sussex would feel very humbled to hear it described that way. But no, I stumbled across the pathway within 3 months of picking up a cricket bat, and this was in the early 90s. So that to have an infrastructure that was, relatively visible and accessible for somebody like me who just picked up a bat at primary school and flew with it. That's where we capture talent because there was a structure for it. So there's some absolute stalwarts of the game, from Andrew England, who was a teacher at Rodine School for a number of years, Terry Burton, Alison Bruce, and even my dad at times, Caroline Atkins' father, Reg. All of them kind of were part of that journey of creating a structure that allowed girls to, thrive within a all girls kind of county pathway. We train in all sorts of places, sometimes at home, sometimes in very small sports halls in the middle of nowhere. But I guess it's the drive and enthusiasm of those coaches and staff, and then blessed with a fair amount of talented players coming through in that time, which helped the momentum, I guess. Claire Connor, obviously a fantastic ambassador for everything that cricket stands for, and to have her as our captain at under 21s and then into the women's side, and then on to her amazing success with England. I guess lots of things aligned at the right time and the right place for us all.
Among that kind of quite limited landscape for the women's game, you wouldn't have had the same access to facilities that players have now, for example, or the same standard of coaching or level of coaching. What allowed the most successful cricketers of that generation, like your Claire Connors, to gain the skill set they needed to succeed at that level, and also for yourself to succeed at county level?
Yeah, I mean, I think people like Claire, she was very fortunate to be at a progressive school like Brighton College that, allowed her to play within the boys setup. Plenty of the other players, Caroline Atkins, Rosalie Birch, Holly Colvin, all played a lot of boys or men's cricket, whether that be at school or at club. And I think that exposure to a higher intensity, whether that be the bowlers bowling faster at you or just the general standard being that little bit stronger, I think that was an important part of it. Universities as well around that. So those that went to university, to a UCCE as they were, I think they're called that again now, but back in the early 2000s, Rosalie Birch is a good example. She actually stayed down in Sussex, went to Sussex University. I believe she studied linguistics, but it then meant she could be part of the Sussex Academy when they started taking the odd female into that programme as well. So I guess it was more about finding opportunities to drive yourself forward and to challenge yourself outside of the rather limited number of maybe women and girls that were playing. Our club side as well was very instrumental. Brighton and Hove was the only club in Sussex that had a women's side that were in the Southern Premier League, which basically meant our Sussex women's team were playing either together as a Sussex side or playing together as a Brighton side. So I guess that we were just fortunate that we had that chance to play together and play some good cricket within that team environment as well.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the decade just before professionalism came in, so when that first tranche of central contracts were given out in 2013, what was the programme at Loughborough like for a cricketer to go through, or a female cricketer to go through? You mentioned the limited funds, but what would that training programme look like?
Yeah, so I guess it depends where you were on the kind of the England pathway. I'll use an example. Myself and Nikki Shaw trained quite a lot together. She was obviously in and around that England team for a long period of time during the 2000s. So we would have some access via the English Institute of Sport, as it was then, to enhance our training. So we'd have our physical training with them within Power Base, which was quite new back then. And then obviously our cricket would fit in and around. We'd have one-to-ones with Dill. If the England staff were around, that would also interlink nicely around our lectures and everything else. And also we'd train with the boys again. So, there'd be sessions where if it was appropriate level that we'd be doing fielding sessions with them, physical sessions, and the occasional cricket skill session as well. So it was, again, probably merging that idea that to really be the best, we could integrate and share ideas. And then I guess as it grew, and you'll probably find the next phase of cricketers, your Nat Siver-Brunt, Amy Jones, Tammy Beaumont, Georgia Adams, all that crew that kind of followed to Loughborough, then it just snowballed because the amount of talent that was there and the amount of availability of the building for the girls to train in, and amazing staff, Sally Ann Briggs as she was then, Sally Ann Beams now, really moved it on to the next level. And her involvement in and around some of the England squads, KSL squads, also kind of meant it was a quite seamless link for some of those girls' journeys, and probably gave them the confidence that they were getting a degree, getting that backup behind them, whilst giving themselves every chance of becoming the world best players.
You mentioned Brighton College a little bit before. You were also director of cricket there for almost 4 years in the early 2010s. And as you said, that's the school that Holly Colvin, Claire Taylor, Freya Davies, Laura Marsh, Sarah Taylor, and men's players like Matt Pryor all went through. We hear a lot about how the private school system dominates the men's player pathways. I think 2/3 of the current Ashes squad attended private schools and were able to benefit from the infrastructure that's afforded to that system of player development. Setting aside the ethics of the private school system pathway, for talented female cricketers in the 2000s, were they also able to benefit from that system in the same way that male players have been able to?
Yeah, I mean, my knowledge is probably limited quite to Sussex in terms of that. Sussex is quite a unique spot, a bit like Surrey, with a huge amount of private schools within a small-ish space. But I think my view on I guess that era was the way that the girls could integrate and be part of it. Obviously, there weren't enough girls back then to have full girls' teams in the early 2000s, but to be part of those sides, and some of the stories that Claire, Holly and Sarah will talk about are very fondly of their time playing school cricket. So I think that was really important. You had some very fantastic coaches there. So John Spencer, who I've known for like a few decades now and worked with at Brighton College, and then worked with when he retired as a volunteer at my state school programme as well. He, again, a bit like Graham Dilley, he just saw that these are very, very talented cricketers and they've got their part to play in the school environment. And I think it was a really healthy way of growing the game, rather than just go, right, we're going to have a girls' team and we're going to play softball because 10 of the girls don't like playing with a hard ball. It was at the time the right way to do it. Moving forward as well, as we get closer to the present day, it is also important to recognise that cricket is a hard sport to facilitate. So private schools often have grounds, the ability to have the ground staff, maybe a block of 10 artificial nets or whatever. So the opportunity to train and play is also there. Much tougher journey for the likes of me who came through the state system to maybe access that. So I think that's, and it always will be, I believe, an important part of the journey for a cricketer is in private schools. Whether Matt Pryor's journey was easier than Claire Connor's, I don't know, but I think they both experienced some passionate coaches and some great facilities, and opportunity to tour abroad as well, which was probably had an impact on their journey as cricketers.
Can you see now, or do you think now that opportunity or those opportunities for girls to benefit through the private school system, whether that be through earning scholarships for being talented at cricket, or just by there being more girls teams at private schools and more opportunities for girls to play cricket, do you think that's now widened the opportunities for girls to participate in that pathway?
Yeah, absolutely. It was probably a shift about a decade ago, and it was weirdly, a lot of it was instigated by the removal of rounders from the PE curriculum. So a lot of schools, both state and private schools, were like, right, well, that was our strike and field GCSE PE out the window, so let's look into cricket, because we've got a boys cricket team, or we've got an artificial wicket, or as a private school we've got the facilities to do this. So there was, in some ways it was forced, their hands were forced, but also the growth of the game in around that late 2000s, when Charlotte Edwards then took over, the World Cup successes, there was a bit more hunger as well. So I think that was an important part of it, but also, the amount of girls. I remember taking a girls' side when I was at Brighton College to Harrow. We played a boys' team. I can't quite remember, it might be the 15Bs or the 16Bs or something like that. And it was the likes of when I think Georgia Adams would have been there, potentially Izzy Collis, Freya Davis, maybe. I can't quite remember my timelines, but it was groundbreaking. I remember it made the Times or the Telegraph because it was the first time an independent girls team was playing against an independent boys team. And it was a great game of cricket, went down to the wire as well. So, and then it was like, well, actually, I think a lot of schools were like, look, this is possible now and we can keep growing the game. I must say, when I was there, there wasn't that many competitive fixtures for the girls only sides, apart from in the national competition, indoor competition, the Lady Tabs as it was back then. But it was exciting to see it grow. And now, having been away from private education for best part of 12, 13 years, to see the amount of girls that are playing competitively or for fun is really pleasing. And actually, you're seeing the same in state schools now, with numerous projects being pushed out, especially around our county, to encourage girls to get out there and give it a go. But also, it's nice for them to be able to do it within their own, with their friends and playing girls only. That said, there's still a lot of girls that are playing in the boys' sides. If they're good enough, they're playing, whether that be at Backer, the school that I previously at, or some of the girls like Molly Adams over at Seaford College, playing in some of the boys' teams over there. It's fantastic that, in a way, they're lucky. They've got both opportunities to play in both sets of cricket. And the volume of girls playing now is I think what will hopefully over the next decade keep growing the game, and hopefully the visibility of the teams now. That, I mean, I watch virtually every game of cricket in that World Cup. Whether the girls are doing that or not is a different matter, but the access now to see it and to understand the journey is completely different to when I was playing.
You mentioned playing with boys and the opportunity to play with boys. Do you think, and also actually how important it was on your own playing career, do you think with the expansion of girls playing, we've almost, I guess you said that there are obviously still girls playing with boys, but if you speak to any kind of professional cricketer now, they'll talk about how playing with boys helped them develop as a player and all of that kind of stuff. Do you think we're almost losing that slightly by segregating by gender at such a young age in age group cricket?
Yeah, there's a possibility that, I guess, and I think it's all depending on your environment that you're in and what access you've got. There's plenty of opportunities to play girls only. Other places it's still a little bit more limited, a bit of geography in that as well. But also it's then recognising what's the best form for that player to develop in. So I can imagine that. We had a discussion back at Brighton College when say Georgia Adams is a good example. Is she going to go and play a county under 17 Norfolk away when she could be playing for the 15As against Eastbourne College and batting in the top 6? What's going to be best for her game, and make the decision based on that. If you're playing against Kent in a semi-final of an under 17 competition, then that's probably the place that she needs to be. And I think a lot of the coaches are still going down that route. It depends what their situation's in. I think the most important thing is that player is being challenged and their potential being pushed as much as possible. So other programs like emerging players programs, academies, is where you're seeing those stretch and challenge moments. But some people will still be getting that in the men's team on a Saturday afternoon or in their school, performance program, because they're good enough to do that. So I hope it's more on an individual basis and what is best for their cricket, really.
Thinking more about the Sussex women's player pathway in particular, over the last 3 years, the women's domestic system has gone through several changes, going from county to regional, back to county with the KSL and now the 100. How has the pathway had to change to adapt around that?
Well, I think in some ways the pathway has been relatively unaffected. Unlike the women's team, who were you're a county team, now you're not, now you are, now you're tier 2. That's been quite confusing, and I guess the top end of the pathway could be where the girls are starting to go, well, where do I need to be to get to the next level? So our challenge as staff and the club and I guess the wider women's game is to make sure they're really clear on what that pathway still looks like. We're now in a position at Sussex where, I'm full-time as the head coach of the women's side. We've got Charlotte Burton, who's been in and around the Sussex setup for longer than me, only because she's like 2 years older than me. But yeah, she's now full-time leading the girls' pathway. So to have two sets of eyes with a lot of experience on the journey that these players are going to be going on and linking in with all the key stakeholders, whether that be our wider region, the ECB, our men's and boys counterparts of the team, is really important. They've just changed the age groups for pathway, which I keep banging on about that for years, because we used to have, it moved up to under 18s about 3 years ago maybe, but then it was 15s and 18s, so it meant your 18 squad was full of exam age girls, and that was stressful in itself, because the girls and boys, but I think the girls still, with that maybe not realising the professionalisation of the game and how life-changing that could be, was still very much focused on making sure their academics were where they needed to be, because that's what they felt was their most likely journey career-wise. So now that we've shifted to 18s and 16s, we've still got the exams. They're never going to go away, but we've just split them across 2 age groups rather than all in one. So that's quite a positive change, I believe. To allow those girls to hopefully balance both throughout the stressful summer, but also that for me a 3-year age range in a group is, whilst they're all physically developing, wasn't necessarily giving you a true reflection of talent and how that was going to be put against other teams. So it'll be interesting to see how the next couple of years move that forward as well. One thing that we've done for the last probably about 8-9 years at Sussex is not just have the 4 or 5 age groups the UCB ask us to and fund us to, but to also have development squads behind that, recognising that some might not go to a school that do cricket, some might not have great access to club nets. So we felt that Sussex would be the ones to help provide that level of player that might not be getting into our A squads, but hopefully will continue to develop under our kind of guidance and the access to facilities that we then had.
What does for a young player coming through the pathways, like someone in their late teens who might be on the brink of making it into a county squad and then maybe going up to a tier 1 squad, what does match volume look like for a player like that in terms of how much experience they have of being in high quality game situations before they get into that tier below England, really, that tier 1 setup?
Well, again, it's quite individual, but if you're in a school that's playing lots of cricket, and like I said, that's not just limited to private schools now. There's a lot more state school opportunities, especially in our environment down here. Then you've got club cricket, and that might be age group. It might be girls and boys age group. You might be playing adult cricket of the weekend. Then you layer in the pathway cricket. And then if you're good enough, you might be playing some EPP, that kind of representative games in and around the region. And obviously, if you're the next phase up, and like Molly Adams, Lottie Curling from Sussex, they're in the Vipers Academy. So they've then got 1-day games, T20 games, 3-day games. And then you say, right, are you going to go and play tier cricket? Tier 3, tier 2 are probably the most likely places at the moment for pathway players. And we almost tripled our number of games from 5 years ago to where we are now in the women's team. So that's a lot of opportunities. So I guess it's gone quite exponentially bigger than it was pre-regionalisation of the game. So I guess it's then making sure workloads are kept under wraps, but also making sure that every game is as meaningful as it can be. If you're going and playing in your local club in a festival game, that's brilliant because you're loving it, you're with your peers, your mates, you're remembering why you played the game and having fun. But also, if you're going to play a 3-day game against Surrey at the Saffrons, which was a previous county venue a couple of decades ago, and challenge yourself against the Red Bull over 3 days, that's also brilliant. So I guess it's, again, each player, the relationship with the coach, the setup, the organisation, and understanding what is best for them, because sometimes there is too much cricket and you lose that kind of quality and drive to know why you're trying to play that game and develop in each of those circumstances. And I think the interesting one for me is that now that there's so much more access to coaching, there's more programs for these girls in particular. Like what we're seeing is their skill development is really ramping up. So yes, they could play the game. Yes, tactically they were pretty aware, but now like that volume they're getting. So the players that we were working with last night in the Emerging Players program, they hit over 200 balls last night, and it wasn't just going through the motions. There was real specificity. They're coaching each other now because they understand what they're looking for. So I guess the volume is great, and it's just making sure that the focus on quality and why they're playing in that particular game, in that particular team is really important too.
Lastly, I just wanted to ask you about tapping into different communities within that pathway. We spoke to Davina Perrin on the podcast a few months ago, and she spoke really passionately about being only the 3rd black female professional cricketer in the country, female professional cricketer in the country. Isha Gu has also spoken a lot about lack of representation from South Asian communities. And I guess also as well, it's worth tapping into what we're talking about with the private school system and working class communities often being underrepresented. Do we do enough to engage those communities to get girls playing cricket and viewing cricket as a viable option for their future?
I don't think we can ever do enough for all of those types of communities to try and open their eyes to what's available, to make it as accessible as possible. And I guess it's a slightly nice segue into my probably most proudest part of my career, which was working at Brighton Aldridge Community Academy. So the premise of that was a cricket academy at a state school in the most deprived ward of Brighton, more deprived than some of the more well-known parts of Sussex like Crawley, etc. And to then build a cricket pitch, an indoor cricket centre, which obviously Sussex Women and Girls have benefited massively from. But the notion that Sir Rod Aldridge, who's the brains behind all this, was that nobody should not have the opportunity, whether that's educationally or in a sporting environment or in any kind of environment, to realise what is out there for them. So in our very small little part of the world, that was our dream and our drive. And alongside that, there was a lot of work around women and girls. So there was stuff with the clubs, but there was also a lot of work in and around our local primary schools, who again, some don't have playing fields, some don't even have playgrounds. So the notion was, what is our community need? What can we do to try and help it? And what's actually happened now, just as I was leaving, that it is now expanded to a new project called Breaking Boundaries, where there'll be a minimum of 4 hubs, but I think the idea is to grow to about 8 over the next 3 or 4 years, situated around the county in those areas, your Crawleys over in the east, right down in the west, to make sure that more state school children, more socioeconomic groups, disadvantaged groups potentially, more ethnic minority groups, are being given a slightly easier access to, let's see what cricket can take me. And then the idea is, if they're showing high potential, then the route is to go to Backer, where the performance program is really, really high. All of that is trying to, like you said, break barriers. I've been so lucky to have played against and with Ebony, Anisha, and those two in particular have gone above and beyond to open the eyes of so many different organisations, funders, but also just the general population, that it's absolutely there. Davina Perrin, like, her record this year was fantastic. It's been so exciting to see such a young player do what she does. And as I go around the circuit now with more and more fixtures with the women's team and watching some of the younger players, things are changing. And we need more people to see Dav Pev like go out and do her thing, and Anisha and Ebbs chatting about it on TV. And then I guess people like Sir Rod Aldridge down here in Sussex, who he's got the money behind him and the drive, but it's also about doing the right thing and giving people the opportunities. And it's something I'm very passionate about, and I sit on the MCC Foundation Advisory Board. And a big part of what they're trying to do is obviously state school, but to broaden people's expectations of what they can achieve is the number one thing.
I guess just to finish up where we started by talking about production of high quality players and England players and players who go on to dominate that international game. With the changes the pathway has undergone in the last couple of years, the regional system changes to the county system, and really reaching out into those communities and tapping into the school system. Do you think that pathway is now in the best place it's ever been, I guess would be the leading question, to produce those kinds of players that perhaps slipped through the net or perhaps didn't have the same opportunities over the last decade?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't answer that in probably into 4 or 5 years' time, when they're all kind of hopefully knocking on the door of England. But I think the resource the ECB have put in, so they've made the pathway as accessible as possible financially. The fact that the new tiered system has created more full-time members of staff is only going to be a good thing. Like the fact that me and Charlotte used to do all the coaching in our spare time, whatever that meant, after our full-time jobs, alongside numerous other coaches, Georgia Adams, our current captain, Kiara Green, juggling full-time jobs, trying to coach the next generation. You're never going to be the best coaches you can be. So the fact that there's more resources in people and everything else. And I guess as well, next year is going to be huge. We've seen how amazing the football has been, and I don't think we'll ever catch football. It's our national sport, but the enthusiasm for families and young girls and boys to aspire to be the best they can be through that. The rugby was amazing. So cricket's got a great opportunity now with a really strong structure to have another springboard moment next year to kick things on. So I know there's lots of different activities already being planned, and I think that's going to be really important, because as well as the pathway is structured and resourced now, it's about finding those young players that they didn't even know maybe this year they wanted to play cricket, and hopefully we can sweep them up really quickly through all the different programs that are out there, ECB, MCC, Chance to Shine, and then through into the kind of performance pathway. So that's a huge challenge for us as English cricket, I guess, to make sure we harness that enthusiasm there is for women's sport over the next 9 months, I guess, as well.
Katya, listening to Alexia, there's been a lot of change in the past 2 decades, the vast majority of which has been categorically good. One of the changes has been an earlier segregation between boys and girls than existed previously. Back in the day, there just weren't provisions for girls-only setups at most clubs. How big a difference do you think that's made, and how does that compare to what exists in Australia or India?
I don't necessarily think it's an earlier segregation. I just think it's more segregation in general. If you listen to any player from any era before the late 2010s who was coming through and playing club cricket, they will tell you how either they were the first girl at their club or how they spent pretty much their entire club career playing on boys' teams. Now, with the expansion of more girls' teams and more girls playing cricket at clubs, which is an inherently good thing, there's just not the need for girls to play on boys' teams anymore, which means they can be playing more with their female peers and being on girls' teams from a much, much younger age. However, the way girls' teams operate or have operated over the last 10 years at least, in club cricket is fundamentally different to the way boys' teams have operated. It's changing slightly now, but over the last 10 years, primarily girls have one team per age group and they have one first 11 team. So the focus isn't necessarily on, I don't know, if you're moving up through the thirds or the seconds or the firsts, it's on getting an 11 out for the weekend rather than that performance aspect of it, of reaching the next level of your club career. There are still, and there have always been girls who've played men's cricket. But primarily the girls who are playing club cricket are playing on one team, and it's not as competitively based as boys club cricket. It is much more about getting an 11 out on the weekend, and being a more social experience rather than a competitive experience. As I say, that is changing now. There are far, far more clubs who have A and B under 15 sides or under 13 sides or whatever it is. But there is less of that competitivism of playing with boys at a younger age than there was back when these players were coming through. And you've also got to think about the different competitive levels of different clubs. You know, if you think about the Bradford Premier League up north, there's not an equivalent for women who are coming through the club system. So the club system is inherently less competitive for women than it is for boys. And the change that's led into that pathway means that system has developed in a way over the last 10 years that hasn't really prioritised player development at that young age.
That's really interesting. Did you also think there's a therefore a drop in the pure volume of cricket played as well? Because the best way to learn about playing cricket is by playing cricket, and there are fewer options as readily available now as there might have been 10, 15, 20 years ago.
100%. I think if you're speaking primarily, I'm speaking primarily actually about the club cricket period from 2010 to 2018, should we say, up until there was a real surge in girls playing club cricket. So many matches get lost, and I know that it happens in boys' matches, but it happens far more in girls' matches below that exam age. Matches get lost to girls not being able to put out an 11 on the side because there simply wasn't enough girls to make up that 11. But yet there were still girls' sections in clubs, so girls weren't playing on boys' teams. They were expected to play on girls' teams, despite the fact there wasn't regularly an 11 that they could put out. So naturally, that volume of cricket does drop, and there just aren't the same number of leagues, or there weren't in that period that I'm talking about, the same number of leagues and cup competitions for girls to be playing the same volume of cricket that boys did. And even when you look at the level above that, when you look to what historically was the county setup below the regional setup, there were far less volume of matches in the county setup than obviously there would be for the men's county setup, because that was the professional level, is the professional level of men's cricket compared to women's cricket. So if you're looking at the regional system, when the county matches were being played, that was the Women's T20 County Cup, which was a maximum of 6 matches in May for all county sides. And then apart from that, the only county cricket that was operating was inter-county stuff when boards arranged it sporadically throughout the year. So the volume of cricket you're getting as a player below that professional setup has never been equivalent, or even close to being equivalent, as a young male player on the same kind of pathway.
Next up is Paul Shaw, the England head coach from 2013 to 2015, who has also fulfilled multiple roles with England elsewhere, including as their high performance manager and academy coach from the early noughties up until 2015. He's also spent time with Lancashire and the Thunder. He now heads up the ECB coach development for the professional game.
Paul, you were England Women's Academy head coach in the late noughties. What was the academy setup like at that point?
Well, I'd taken that role on the great work that Barbara Daniels had done, obviously a former England player, and very good player, very good coach. So she'd laid really strong foundations. But really, it was just a period of maybe a couple of weekends per month in the winter period. And that was looking at identifying the higher potential players across the country, bringing them into centralised camps and trying to complement, the skills and capabilities that they already had. But in terms of staff, we had casual staff, part-time staff. So we had a couple of assistant coaches working with us at that point in time. And science and medicine staff, physio, S&C coach, but no psych initially. So, but as I said, that was quite fairly casual, very different towards where we're at now.
And when you were looking at spotting players who were going to go to the next level and represent England and perhaps even further, what would be the characteristics in a player you would look for and go, that is going to be a player who's going to be a great player for us over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, look, it's a really tricky one, and I don't think there's an exact science, but the way we looked at it back then, we focused very much on their cricketing capabilities, the technical and tactical skills that they had and whether they had room for growth and development. That was a big thing. But also, did they have an open mind? Were they curious? Were they open to learning and development? How driven were they? Were they resilient? And if not, how could we build a few speed bumps with some scaffolding around it to enable them to develop that resilience? And did they have a real hunger and thirst to keep growing, developing, and playing at the highest level? So someone like a Catherine Brunt, in and around that time, the one thing that stood out certainly for me with Catherine was her incredible drive. She had a wonderful drive, and I remember having a number of conversations with Catherine, which would have been late 90s, early 2000s, around what she wanted to achieve. And from her perspective, it was about being the best player that she could be. And if she did that, she was confident she would play for England and should be one of the best bowlers in the world. And history would tell us that she was successful in doing that. So I think that inner drive is really important, and openness to grow and develop and acquire new skills.
And given the differences in the setup at that time compared to what we have under a professional system today, what were the skills gaps that you were seeing in players that they had coming through to that top level?
Well, a number of them, it would have been around the tactical awareness of playing a game. There would be some technical areas that needed work on, but it were mostly the tactical side of the game. So we would create as many scenarios as we possibly could that reflected certain phases of play in a game, and put the players in those scenarios and give them opportunity to express themselves, but also some guidance as to how they might want to play those certain situations, whether with bat in hand or ball in hand. And probably the other one would have been resilience, because there were a number of the players that we certainly had, all very young players at that time, but already good players in county cricket. So they'd not had too many challenging times as such on the cricket field. They'd been successful. So putting them all together and working with them and showing them and trying to create a vision with them collaboratively of what they could achieve. And then also the skills that they would need to move towards England, i.e. resilience, greater tactical awareness, learning how to play different phases of the game, and also some technical areas that they need to develop too.
And how do you create that kind of tactical development and those scenarios in a kind of limited international calendar, I guess, because you can't recreate that game intensity however hard you try in training?
That's a really good point. And then if you align that to, obviously all our training in the winter is inside, isn't it? And you've got natural physical constraints because of the facility. Certainly we were very fortunate that we were able to train at the National Cricket Performance Centre at Loughborough University. And that's a sizable indoor venue in comparison to others perhaps around the country. Certainly back then it was. And what we used to do, we used to pull the nets back so it opened up a bigger playing area, and then we'd work through 5 overs, 10 overs, phases of play. So it might be in the power play area, the middle phase of the game, and then the last few overs of the game. And we'd constantly work through that. We would also have 1 or 2 nets operating in the fielding area at the back, where the players would come into the scenario and then go out and work on their technical skills as well. So we ensured that they got good volume from a technical fundamentals perspective to develop those basics. And we talked about developing world-class basics. And then they would keep coming back into the scenario. So there was a balance really of the tactical work, the open play scenarios, and real volume work, developing the fundamental basics of the game. And of course, there's a gym on site at Loughborough, the National Cricket Performance Centre. So over the time we were together, they would also be working through their gym programs as well.
And how successful do you think that kind of approach was to put more tactical awareness or technical development into players using that approach over your time?
I think it was successful in a number of areas. I think the players were able to play the game with more tactical awareness. They were more astute in situations. We could see that, certainly green shoots to that beginning to emerge. The technical abilities were getting better, and also the mental capabilities to deal with certain situations. For example, when under pressure and those types of things, we would use a psychologist to help the players with that, and then we would integrate as much as we possibly could within our camps. And think of the players that came through probably from the years of 2001 to in and around 2012, 2013. There were a good group of players that came through and then went on and had lengthy careers. In fact, a couple of them, I think, are still playing for the England team at the moment. So it was really good, I think, at identifying players and transitioning players into that England environment. And, you know, I think there's a very fine line and a difference between being fit to play for England and being fit to perform for England. There's something about putting on that shirt, but also the responsibility of performances that comes into that as well. And we would work quite hard there and smart in ensuring that the players were ready to perform for England when they got their opportunity. And a number of them in that 10, 15-year period did do.
Could you just expand on that a bit? So the difference between being fit to play for England and fit to perform for England. What differences will you see in a player that is fit to play and a player that is fit to perform?
So I think you've got a player that's fit to play that will go into the team and be happy with being in the team and playing for England and wearing the three lines and showing immense pride. But they may not have the full capability and skills to be able to perform. So, for example, if a Charlotte Edwards was retiring, then you'd want the next player going in being ready to perform, accepted maybe not quite at that level, but actually within 12 months being able to perform close to that level as much as possible. So whether it was a batter, a bowler, or a wicketkeeper, we were very focused on stretching the players to some degree outside their comfort zone, so they would be more ready to perform for England, which I think is quite important, really. And to help that transition, what we did that back in the day, I should say, we played a number of our fixtures. We went to India and played in challenging environments in terms of the pitches, the heat, etc. in India. We played a number of boys teams as well that were probably under 15, under 16 age groups, just to challenge the players that little bit more and get them more ready to perform. And a link to that would be creating environments where they played at their level too, so that they could grow confidence whilst playing at their level and then go again and play slightly more challenging opposition.
Do you think there's a danger, I guess, specifically in the domestic system that would have been in place during your time and to some extent the domestic system we still have today, although obviously it's slightly different now or a lot different now, that players go back into that domestic system and get used to playing too much cricket that is comfortable for them rather than, as you say, that stretch and challenge opportunity?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think when they go back into, as they did in my time early in county cricket, then into regions, now into county cricket, I think the standard is progressing quite nicely because the players now, most of them have had 5 years learning how to train, played a lot more competitive cricket. So the standard is rising. I think the challenge for an England player going back into that standard is playing a game within a game. So really looking to stretch the way that they're playing in county cricket to reflect their role that they would need to perform for England. Because sometimes that's different, isn't it? So, you know, if they're playing within their comfort zone, how can they stretch themselves, whether it's a slight heightened tempo, whether it's playing percentage cricket more, whether it's playing more smart cricket, whether it's looking to put your foot down and play real high tempo cricket, but actually really stretching themselves. So a game within a game to give them the best chance when they go back into that England environment. They've actually not maintained, they've progressed. So, and I think there's a fine balance with that, to be honest.
Just going back to specific players who came through during the time that you were with England. So you were England women's head coach from 2013 to 2015. That was around the time players like Nat Sciver-Brunt and Heather Knight were making their way into the senior team. What was it about those two in particular that stood out, or was there anything about those two in particular that stood out as players that would go on to dominate the women's game in England for the next decade?
Both had great potential, and when I say potential, they've both got good enough games to perform. Nat was still developing her game. In any level, you're still developing the game, but she had to, from a skill acquisition perspective, had to develop her batting game somewhat. Heather had probably developed her game largely. And I think the real thing was around their mindset. Both of them were calm. Both of them were really calm and collected in pressure situations. Had an insatiable drive to do well. In any situation, any practice session, any preparation game, academy game, or going on England games, each of them were very focused on performance and performing in that situation. And they broke the game down into bite-sized chunks. So if there was a period of them getting into their innings, then a middle phase where they just gradually look to push on, and then an end phase where they used to look to play really aggressively. And they were very focused and planful in around that. Both good values, good beliefs, and I would call performance behaviours. So would do the right thing at the right time, and both exceptional role models. So they would be the things that you would spot in those two players, which would have been, on that would have been around about 2011 to 2013, and then for Heather Knight a little bit before that, probably 2007 onwards, you saw a fair bit of that. And as a coach and a coaching team, what you're looking to do is identify those strengths and get them to play to those strengths, and turn those strengths into super strengths, whilst developing some areas of the game that they needed to from a developmental perspective. You would still focus on their strengths.
You mentioned that high performance manager role and also women's head coach role. What is the difference between those two roles?
Well, when I went into the England team, I'd been high performance manager for I think 3.5 years, which incorporated the head coach of the academy. But in essence, what it was ensuring that the pathway, we had alignment across a pathway, all the playing groups across that pathway. We got good staff in, so the recruitment and development of high quality staff to develop the multidisciplinary teams across each of the teams that we had. It was also to look at the playing structure and training programs and develop a culture that was around growth and development of players to then perform for England. When I went into the England team as coach, it was head coach, which was the day-to-day coaching players, working with the management team and coaching team on a hands-on basis. And it was also the strategy, the long-term strategy, the 4-year strategy of building the game. And I had oversight from the England team all the way down the pathway. So I had a fairly broad role, and at times that was challenging, because if you're in an Ashes or a World Cup or a very competitive series, you've got to be in the moment to enable the players to perform at their best and the staff to do that. And you're also thinking around, we've got a World Cup in 2 years' time or another Ashes in 2 years' time. What do we need to put in place in line with our strategy and vision to help us get there? So there's a bigger picture role, the performance director piece, and then there's a hands-on coaching role as well. So both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I'm just kind of interested in that, because you said you were thinking about the pathway to get players to come through to England at that, when you're in that high performance role, and then becoming that head coach, where you are given a set of players and you need to make them the best players they can be in order to get results. Did you find anything out about like the work you'd done in that kind of high performance role when you became head coach in terms of the pathway and the players feeding through to England?
I did, and I think it served me very positively, because that, whilst academy head coach and that high performance role, what it enabled me to do were identify those players from 15-year-old upwards that had potential, get them working within our programs with some high quality coaches. We brought in some, if you like, discipline leads, a batting lead, a fielding lead, pace bowling, wicket keeping, fielding. And those people worked across that pathway. So constantly in touch with those, saying who are the ones that are coming through, what are they seeing, what are the characteristics, what are the capabilities, what do you think their potential is? So in constant communication with those people, those coaches, and also the rest of the staff. And I'd be at pretty much every camp from under 15s all the way through to England. I would be there. So I got a really good insight. It meant I was stretched, but I've got a really good insight in terms of those players coming through. So I probably had a little bit more confidence on some of the players that were coming through, because I'd worked with them and I'd seen them and I understood the character and how they dealt with pressure and certain situations, and what playing capability they did have, and also what potential they had. So that, I think that was a great help. I mean, players like, we mentioned a couple, but Heather Knight, Danny Wyatt, Anya Shrubsole, Tammy Beaumont, Amy Jones, Danny Hazel, Nat Silverbrunt now, Tash Farrant, Kate Cross, Sophie Eccleston were all players that were coming through that system at that period of time, that all got good opportunity to develop their games. And then obviously the rest's history. All have done well for England.
Well, I think that's an incredible list of players, of so many great names who've played for England over the last 20 years. We've talked a little bit about what makes a player on the cusp of kind of Academy England selection a standout player. What makes a 14, 15-year-old stand out? Because it's quite hard to look at a teenager and think, yeah, in 10 years' time, they're going to be, world number one.
Danny Wyatt Hodge would be a great example of that. So she played junior Super Fours when she was about 13 or 14. And she also played above her age groups and played a fair bit of boys cricket. And I would watch her play and how she went about the game. And she never seemed fazed. She was a type of person that would just play whatever standard, she would just play with bat and with ball, and was brilliant in the field. So athletically, you could see the potential. From a batting perspective, you could, and also in the field and with the ball. But also when you sat down and talked to her, nothing seemed to faze her. And there's something to be said in that. She just took on every opportunity. So what you try and do then is get a Danny Wyatt Hodge, for example, working with the right coaches, increase the time on task appropriately, create a really good environment around them that encourages their growth and development, and encourages them to smash through any glass ceiling that there might be, because they're young. Actually, the world's your oyster. You can do some great things here. So we would have some great people working with the likes of Danny, to help them see what their future could be, and then work towards that in a collaborative fashion.
Yeah, it's hugely exciting. And when you left England, you went on to be Lancashire Thunder head coach for a while, and also coach of Manchester Originals women. When we look at a player who's coming through to get perhaps their first county contract now, what is the difference between that player and the same player who would have been coming through to get that contract 10, 15 years ago?
They would be further ahead in terms of their physical development, their technical, tactical development, and psychologically too, because they have been probably in an academy or an EPP, or being around competitive cricket training and playing at a much younger age. The standard is higher, so therefore they're in a better place to, if you like, pick up a contract and have that career. So they would be more advanced compared to where they were 10 years ago or 25 years ago, certainly when I started.
And thinking about what are the different challenges that players are facing now in terms of their technical and tactical development? Because we talked earlier about that kind of tactical knowledge. What are those kind of areas like now?
I think it's being able to be really powerful and be on the front foot. So there's a mental capability, I think, there of having a really positive mindset, taking the game to the opposition. being strong, powerful, and dynamic are areas that have developed massively in the women's game over the last few years. And I think that's still got some room for a little bit more growth. But also learning how to play the game smartly. I know obviously Charlotte Edwards very, very well. And from an England perspective, I know she wants the players to play positive cricket and smart cricket. So sometimes there is certain phases in a game where you kind of have to identify the situation and you play the situation better than the opposition. And sometimes the batter that might be coming out of gear 5 and sitting in gear 3 for a bit, knocking it around a little bit until you're able to get back on top of the bowler and then take the game to them. So I would say that's a big part of the women's game that has still got some room for growth. I think it's moving in the direction, but the development of a playing smart cricket and winning phases of play when it's perhaps not suitable to hit the ball so hard. Keep looking to hit the ball hard, but if it's not there, can you get into the outfield for 2 and get up and down? And looking to play a little bit more smarter, I think. And certainly that's what Charlotte's looking to do with the England team.
Why do you think young players, like thinking mostly about your time at Lancashire, why do you think young players coming through into that county setup now are less able at that point in their careers to kind of sit in and, what you said, go down a gear slightly for a little bit and sit in before taking off?
I think it's because we talk a lot as coaches around taking the positive step, which I think is completely right, and looking to be really positive. But it's not quite a switch. You can do that and then come straight back. Once you've got momentum, you tend to stay on the front foot looking to attack. But I think it's learning how to identify that situation where you might have to come down a couple of gears and then go back up. I would call it battership from a batting perspective. Understanding how to go through the gears, when to sit in, when to attack, still with a positive mindset. And I think the more games that they play of real competitive nature, which they are doing now, which is fantastic, and the more middle practice, scenario play, where they're putting in those types of situations, I think that will grow and that will develop in the next 2 years.
Do you think in the women's game in particular, we do enough to encourage knowledge to stay within the game? Because thinking about it more, we've got Charlotte Edwards as England women's head coach now, and obviously you don't have to be a player to coach. But before that, there were very few coaches who were previously England women's players, especially none in the professional era. And if you look around the county coaches as well, there are very few who were players in that era as well, or players who came through and stayed in the game. I guess it's different now, given that there is money to be earned during a professional career, and perhaps players are in a different financial situation when they end their careers. But do you think there's more that could be done to encourage players to go down the coaching pathway?
Absolutely. I think by all clubs, by the PCA, by the ECB, by everyone involved in the women's game. And certainly I think what we will find with the professionalisation of the women's game, I think because players, as again towards the end of their career or might be early in their career and feel that they're not quite good enough, I think will certainly identify the opportunities to coach. And that's certainly reflected on our advanced program, level 3 program. We've got far more females coming into those programs, and we're targeting females. So we work a lot with directors of cricket in the women's game across the country to identify coaches that they're going to be working with in the female game. That might be emerging player pathway coaches, might be academy, might be future first team coaches, or a specialist coach perhaps. So by working closely there, we're certainly getting far more on our advanced program, and we're targeting even more because I think there's huge potential in female coaching. In the specialist advanced program, we've got a few less numbers, but it's something we're targeting. In fact, Fran Wilson is, the ex-England player that's just retired from playing, is currently on our specialist program, the level 4, and going really, really well. So the signs are positive. I think we've all just got to keep doing more work to generate, the interest, make it really clear that there's a good pathway and a professional pathway, and you can coach at wherever level you want and every level you choose, and we'll do all we can to support your growth and development. Still a lot of work that needs to be done, no doubt about that. But I'm quite excited about that challenge because I have a vast interest and history in the women's game. So wherever I can help, hence the meetings with the directors of cricket in the women's game, encouraging female players, female coaches to come to our programs is something that, I do enjoy, and I'll do all I can to keep growing those numbers. And not just the numbers, the coaching capability, because I think that's important as well, ensuring when they go into the environments, professional environments, they've got the skills, capability and knowledge to do a really, really good job. And if that happens and we've done our job, the councils have done their jobs, and as have the PCA.
Katya, at a very basic level, the number of really prominent, very successful England players that Shaw has overseen their development of is kind of mad.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. Basically, anyone who has done anything significant for England over the last 15 years came through while he was involved in the England management or the England Academy and England Women's setup. And then when you also look at his role at Lancashire have developed into, since he's moved on from Lancashire, one of the best teams or one of the best county tier 1 teams in the country. And he had players like Emma Lamb under his care at Lancashire when he was in that job. But yeah, speaking to him was really important because he is someone who has been so intimately involved in creating the pathway that now exists, and also seeing the kind of changeover in that setup from the setup of the late 2000s and early 2010s into that professional era and into the system that we recognise today. And also just from a purely kind of visual point of view, you can see that cutoff of when he leaves in 2015. That's when the kind of production line of players who have gone on to have really incredible careers for England has pretty much stopped until today. So yeah, he was a really important person to talk to.
I think there's one specific bit of the conversation that I thought was quite revealing in that he's actually uniquely placed to not quite uniquely placed, but he's one of very few people qualified enough to make this point with authority. And that's actually the tactical knowledge gap between players coming through now compared to 10, 15 years ago, where he is saying actually young players coming through don't have the same level of tactical sense as the players coming through a long time ago. Obviously, you're not comparing two totally equal things here. Back then, the players you're talking about who he had been working with in an England setup, it's a very small number of players, whereas now you're looking more broadly at the professional game as a whole. But that's still a very, very interesting observation.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's something going back to what we were talking about earlier about the different ways in which girls play club cricket and play on the earlier rungs of that pathway than in boys cricket, and then what is learnt when you're playing what is normally boys cricket. And interestingly, when he talks about about players coming through at county level, he talks about having to instill that kind of knowledge while these players are already professional. So it's about that kind of almost basic understanding and learning going on while you're already at that professional level. Perhaps you've got a 100 contract, or perhaps, you're playing at this kind of standard of cricket. And it also brought home to me just how much younger most players are when they come through and play that level of cricket. So yeah, it was really interesting. And what also was kind of brought home to me was that at the point that Paul left the England setup in 2015, that was around the time of the KSL and the move to the regional system, which happened a few years after that. And when England became a professional team in 2013, the domestic setup was still unprofessional. And to me, it looks like that gap between the players who were professional, who were already in that England group, and the domestic system widened during that time period. And the pathway got distorted between the players who were already professional and the players who weren't. Then you had the KSL and you had the regional system, which was introduced later on. And that gap almost got shifted. So the disconnect became at the level below the regional setup. And it's only now when you've got the tier 3 and the tier 2 counties, and going back to what Alexia Walker was saying earlier in the episode, about those opportunities for girls to go and play different levels of cricket when they're coming through. So at Sussex to go and play tier 2 or tier 3 cricket and then move up to a tier 1 team. It's only really now that volume of cricket is changing, and that knowledge can be acquired at a younger age before you come through into these top level teams.
Absolutely. Well, now we're going to hear from Lauren Winfield-Hill, who's been talking to lots of Australians over the last week to hear what they think. For cricketers serious about improvement, Lauren Winfield-Hill's Women and Girls Coaching course offers a new way to train. The courses bring expert digital coaching to players everywhere, combining technical skill, tactical awareness, and fitness development in one easy-to-use platform. Learn from a professional who's been there at the very top of the game. Visit the link in the description and use the code Wisden to get 10% off and take your cricket further. Before we get to the big question of the week, a bit of news first. So England announced the latest batch of central contracts for the next year. A few interesting things in there. So we already knew that Kate Cross was not getting one. She announced that herself in September. Lindsay Smith has her first full central contract. And I suppose it's interesting seeing who has the skills contract. So basically the old development contracts and who has a full one. So Emma Lamb, who's played a lot for England, she's got a skills contract. Maya Bouchier's got a full one. Who else? Mahika Gore's got a full contract. Freya Kemp as well. Emma Arlott does not have one. I suppose, Lauren, the big thing in England's calendar at the moment is the T20 World Cup that happens early-ish in the English summer next year. So I guess there are a few clues in here in terms of what England might be thinking in terms of selection.
Yeah, I think so. I sort of feel like there's a couple of those that you could have almost the other way around. Like I feel like Lammy and Emma Arlott have maybe been a little bit hard done by in terms of just being on a skills contract. I think especially Emma Arlott, like she's playing. Lammy, you could argue that is more so in the 50 over frame than the T20 frame. So it's not necessarily in the immediate thinking. But Emma Arlott's basically an all formats player at the minute. And, you know, she's doing really well out here in the WBBL. She's done really well in 50 over cricket. You look at Kate Cross not being around, you know, she's going to have a sizable impact in that format as well at some point, I'd imagine. So I think them two have been a little bit stung with not getting a full contract. With Boucher, I can see it from both sides. Like she's obviously been in the fold. She's been on a lot of trips. She's been in the team. She's been in the squad. She's been out of both. You do feel with the T20 World Cup, she'll be closer to the frame with that necessarily. But yeah, you know, Lottie's obviously a big fan of Bush as well. You know, I know she's obviously not played a lot under her, but she knows a lot about her. She'll invest a lot of time and energy into Bush. She just banged 60 odd for Melbourne Stars the other day as well in the WBBL. So she's certainly putting herself back in the groove. The thing with Bush is her best day is really awesome, and then the days in between, it can be a little bit like absolutely nowhere, and you feel like she combusts pretty quick. But I think she's definitely she'll definitely be there and thereabouts for that T20 World Cup squad. Mahika's an interesting one to have a full contract, because I think sometimes the skills contracts are almost like a bit of a pull of power, is to be able to manage your young bowlers or to manage workloads and have those arm wrestles with counties on availability. Whereas we all know that, I guess the rare talent that Mahika Gore possesses in terms of just 7-foot delivery, left arm. She's a rare talent for sure, but she's almost been rewarded on the back of not really anything so far. I mean, we spoke about it in the World Cup, weren't we? We were like, where is she?
Yeah.
So she's obviously not been forgotten about because she's got a contract. So that's encouraging from our point of view of wondering that, has she been lost in the wilderness? And she's not. But yeah, interesting one. I think a big thing for her is to get her body right and to be able to play frequency of matches. Probably the T20 World Cup next year will help her because, shorter bowling spells, lower workloads. She'll maybe play a bit more of a role than she sort of would in a 50 over format at the minute.
What also is interesting is that there are no 2-year contracts being given. So a lot of players, the more senior players, are in the second year of 2-year contracts, but no one has been given one, I guess, to take them through towards the end of 2027. One of the people who is in their second year of a 2-year contract is Heather Knight, and there was news around her this week. She's not going to be playing in the 100 in 2026. Instead, she's taking up a role as London Spirit's general manager. So ultimately, she'll be giving technical support to the coaching staff and working very closely with the director of cricket at London Spirit, Mo Bobat. Lauren, does this signal the beginning of the end of Heather Knight's playing career?
I think that's the place everybody went to. I think she sort of had to get that across, didn't she, in her announcement that she's still very much available for England and for Somerset as well. So I think she felt like once it was out there and probably got a bombardment of happy retirements, that she's actually not retiring. And I think it's having spoken to her, it sounds like it's an opportunity that just can't go amiss for Heather. Obviously working with Mo, how well respected he is in the game in terms of what he obviously did when he was at ECB and then moving to RCB. I think it's an amazing opportunity, especially with all this privatisation, and you're working with some real powerhouse investors, coaches, analytics, everything. Sounds like it's just an opportunity that she couldn't say no to. I think it suits her to a T. I think it's exactly what she wanted to go into in terms of those sort of like managerial director sort of roles. And I think like having spoke to her, she hasn't actually got through a 100 competition for 2 years. Do you have to be playing in our Premier competition to be considered for England? Like, when there's nothing we're going to find out about Heather Knight in the 100 that we don't already know. But it will be interesting where things go and what things look like for her now, in terms of T20 World Cup next year. Whether this is the start of the end or if it is genuinely just taking another opportunity that she felt like she didn't want to say no to. But I think it's going to be an awesome gig for her. And she wouldn't have taken it lightly at all. So, I think when I was speaking to a few players, it sort of sounded like she was staying at Spirit and everyone just assumed that it was in a playing and captaincy position. But obviously she'll be in a managerial role and leadership role, but in a different sense.
Moving on to the big question this week, we're looking at the development of English players and sort of specifically batters compared to those out in Australia and how that's differed over the last 10 or 15 years. You've been speaking to lots of Aussies. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I had a really good conversation. It sort of started with Georgia Voll. Obviously played a lot with her at Queensland, spent a lot of time with Volley, and we were I just spoke to her a little bit about what their pathways looked like for her, for Annabelle Sutherland and for Phoebe Litchfield. They were sort of the big three that I could think of as being like the young superstars, I guess. And it probably confirmed what I already thought and what we sort of alluded to a little bit in conversation last week was the age in which they're exposed to a high performance environment. So Volley, Phoebe, Volley was 16, Phoebe I think she was 15, and Belzy a pretty similar age as when they were first in their state programs. So, and what that looks like is gym twice a week, hits 3 times a week. I don't know what a 15-year-old in England would be doing, but I can't imagine they'd be exposed to that volume of training. And then the other thing is, you're rubbing shoulders with Elise Perry, Meg Lanning, all these sorts of players, Alyssa Healy at 15 years old. So that's probably the integration point of when they got into these programs, and not where you're an EPP and you train once a week. Like, and the thing that stands out to me most over here is like you've got Phoebe. Phoebe obviously grew up in Orange, which is like country New South Wales. Like Georgia Voll was Toowoomba. So these people, like these families are driving 2 hours each way to take the girls to training. And like I've seen that from coaching a bit on the pathways at Queensland, is like some of the country kids will literally drive 2 hours to training, go to and then 2 hours home 3 times a week to do their cricket. Like, I'm just not sure you'd get the same commitment consistently in England. But it's sort of like just one of those things over here where it's like, well, if you want to be good, that's what you got to do. And it's like the parents have signed up for that as well. There's probably the piece of the other sport thing. I think people specialise really early in England. I think over here you sort of see a lot, like, let's just, like, even if you use Ash Barty as an example, like, she played tennis, obviously did junior Wimbledon, fell out of love with tennis, played in the Big Bash, then went back to her tennis. Like, there's always this, like, other sport going alongside of it. Like, Phoebe Litchfield was in hyper performance programs in hockey, Georgia Voll was rugby league, Annabelle Sutherland was AFL. So they've just got this, like, real good all-rounder piece where it probably wasn't just cricket from, through the childhood and even up to sort of, like, I think, like Volley was saying, until they debuted for state cricket, they sort of all just kept their other sports going and didn't specialise early. Yeah, and then the other thing is, like, the volume of balls they hit. Like, so I was talking to Volley and I was like, and I obviously see how much she trains. When I was at Stars, I saw how much Annabelle Sutherland trained, and I was like, well, like, what are we talking? And she goes, well, since I was probably 15, 16, they've all got private coaches. So, like, Phoebe Litchfield, her dad did a lot of work with her because they were obviously a bit more rural. They weren't going to be traveling, as frequently. But I know, like, she's had a private coach for some time now that she's worked with. And they would have like 3 hours of one-to-ones a week. So you've got your team session, you're probably back for half an hour in a team session, but they'd all have an hour, a one-to-one 2 or 3 times a week. So the amount of work that you can get through on a one-to-one, the amount of, purpose-driven practice, specific practice, like, just the volume of balls that you would hit is far superior to, I think, what we hit in England. Like, when I was at uni on the program at the MCCU, like, I reckon I hit that much, but I don't reckon I've ever hit that much since. You sort of do your team sessions, and then I hit over here a lot more, like, just, like on the bowling machine, like Volley and those and Belzy and those girls, they would all just go on the bowling machine. It's like, it's a bit out of fashion in England, isn't it, to go in on the bowling machine and just to hit some, like, specific practice. Or I think the big difference is, like, it just confirmed what we thought. It was probably like that early specialization piece and the actual volume of practice and the amount of balls that they hit. And the other really interesting thing was, I think they're like, I would say that an English person to an Aussie would be like, oh, they're obsessed, they hit so many balls, they do, like, they train so hard, they do so much, can't be good for them. But they all have something else. Whereas in England, I really fear as well, especially with the girls coming through now, you sort of, like, you got your 20 to 25-year-olds, and even just an example at Yorkshire, and it'd be like, you have a 2 or 3 months off before you're back in, and it's like, what you've been up to? And they're like, oh, well, I just couldn't wait to get back in. I've been so bored. And that we're talking about the 3 prodigies here. We're not talking about every single young Australian in the domestic program. But, like, they're studying, they've got degrees, they're doing fitness courses, like barista courses, like, they do other things. So they're just this more, like, well-rounded human being that's, like, immensely immersed in their cricket, but also are like, we're not just cricketers. Like, we have, and I feel like you hear that drum banged all the time about balance and not putting all your eggs in one basket, and, like, having other interests and hobbies and whatever. But, like, they actually have that, and probably just enables them to be, like, pretty balanced human being, probably a level of maturity from being in different environments and studying and being at uni or whatever. But yeah, just cut a little bit differently and done things a little bit different. It's sort of like the perception is that they're childhood freaks, and they're just not. Like they hit more balls than anyone else. They train harder than than a lot of people who I've seen all over the world. I see that with Volley every week. She's in on the bowling machine 2 or 3 hours a week extra. Beth Mooney was the same when she was around, like probably less so now. You probably get to a point where you're just maintaining a lot and you're playing all year round, so the volume comes down. But like how many gun 15-year-olds have we got in our first class county systems? There's not many that I can sort of think of that are that young that are like contracted with counties. Tilly 14 Coleman's probably, and Dav.
Yeah, I think those two and Capsy a few years ago, the only three I can really think of being in that senior environment from a really young age. I mean, there's loads there that I think is really interesting. I guess on the volume of balls they hit as professionals, so not when they're 15, 16, but when they're 21, 22, 23. So do the senior Aussies just spend more hours training, or is it that in England there's still a lot of time being spent on training, but it's not as specific on literally just facing balls?
No, I think a lot of it's self-driven with private coaches independently, or like a lot of the time is they'll come in before a session. So we might have a team session. It might be bat v ball. We've got 2 hours of scenarios, say, for example, with Queensland. Volley would be text the coaches, if a session starts at 11, can I come in at 9:30, go on the machine for an hour? Or, after a session you're finished, or she might sometimes she'd say to me, do you want to hit some more balls? And I'd be like, yeah, let's do it. So we go pair up on the bowling machine. And then like Belsley and Litch are obviously different because they've got like their private coaches. So they'll do a team session, but then 2 or 3 times a week they'll have an hour with their private coach. So it's very independent. Like, I think the piece with that is like, you're not waiting for someone to tell you what to do. Like, if I'm in a session at Yorkshire, or like I've got something scheduled in, I don't know, like it might be that we've got a team session and we're in on Merlin and we're practicing playing leg spin. Whereas if I go and if I'm either buddying up with a teammate, or I've asked Richie Pyra for a bit of extra practice, or I've got a private coach, I tell them what I want. So I'm getting an awareness of my game, saying, well, I don't really need to go against, we're doing Merlin, fine. But actually, I really need to, I want to do an hour of sweeping off spin. So like, you're then in charge, and it's that awareness piece of what you want to work on, where you want to take your game to. And then I guess it's even just a level of just not waiting for things to happen, like to actually take control of an accountability. Like, it sounds really stupid, but even we're so used to being like told what to do, where to go, what you're working on, how long you're working on for it. Even like a level of like organizing and being like, go seek a private coach, right? 11 o'clock on Wednesday, I've booked a lane, whatever. Like, even just things like that, develop your independence and you're not just relying on people.
I mean, do you think there needs to be a cultural shift in England? Because it sounds like a lot of this stuff is almost like a cultural thing, that in Australia it's just more normal to be that independent and take that sort of what's the right word, ownership and responsibility really for your own progress, and not sort of letting it all be on the overall team coach.
I remember even when Rich Pyra first came back into Yorkshire last year, and he was like, oh, the girls don't hit that much, like, they could pair up. Nobody ever asked for extra hits. I was the only one. And I would say I hit quite a lot. I'm obviously not in the young superstar bracket, but like, I would say I'm somebody that hits quite a lot as an English player. But the first thing he sort of said when he came back into it is like, it's amazing no one's really asking for extra hits. And it's like we're waiting for things to be dictated to rather than seeking it. Yeah, I mean, I do think, you think, right? So say, for example, you have 3 training sessions a week with your county, which is about right, 3 or 4. Let's be honest, if you're in a squad of 15 training, you might, if you're bat for half an hour in a scenario or facing bowlers or against the wanger or whatever. That's an hour and a half a week. That's not that much. You're asking players in 50 over cricket to bat an hour and a half in a day.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting when you put it like that, though. That to me, as someone who's never been anywhere near any sort of professional cricket environment, I'm like, that's not actually that much more than like club players.
No. That's the thing, and it's like, and I always think, like, even taking it back to like Robbo era, and I know the game's shifted a fair bit since then, but like, a lot of it was like, how can we expect you to bat for an hour if all your sessions are like 20 minutes, half an hour long? All that happens is when you're in the middle, after half an hour, you lose concentration. Because that's all you're conditioning yourself to do. Whereas if you bat for an hour on, you're probably going to, let's be honest, if you do an hour with a private coach, you're probably facing 100 balls. So it's very different in terms of the volume. And that's why I personally really like training on my own, because I can do what I want. And I actually get to determine what I'm sort of working on. If they're doing 3 1-to-1s a week, plus 3 team sessions, you're batting for about 5 hours a week. You put it into a context of a week, that's still not very, very much. But what I would say is, if you're not doing that, like you say, you're probably for an hour and a half.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess the other thing that I found quite interesting comparing the 2 setups is just where those 3 you mentioned, where Vol, Litchfield and Sutherland were age 15, 16. Is there anything that you see that's different in the 2 systems that mean that Australia have more players like that at the age of 15, 16, if that makes sense?
I do. I think the early, especially like the early, the playing 2 sports, you look at Kiva Bray, Elise Perry, they're both played soccer and they're both in, like Kiva Bray, who's playing for Sixers at the minute. She's like the young superstar that everyone's going mad for. She's on the Matildas like pathway, as she's a football goalkeeper as well. So there's that like sports going alongside each other. You've also got to take it with a grain of salt, because we're talking about 3 of the best young players in the world. Like there's hundreds of other domestic players in Australia who aren't the 3 youngsters in the world. Do you know what I mean? So a minority, not a majority. So there's an elements of that. But even if you look at, we don't want to probably talk about it yesterday, but like Harry Brook, Joe Root, like being around them at Yorkshire, they hit more balls. Like there is no secret recipe than they train more than people who are average. And there's also a lot of people that train a lot that aren't the best players in the world, but it's not going to do you any harm.
No, that's really interesting. I think let's leave it there for this week. But yeah, I'm sort of interested in questions around this, and I wonder if speaking to more people in and around the game, that there is a sort of shift in how people go about training in England over the next few years. That's everything for today's show. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, why not leave us a nice review or comment on the podcast app of your choice.